Why do the present day Democrats and liberals always say that they're working against fascism and white supremacy? Why is it that you have now this generation or two based on the comments from the victims of the hate crime on the New York City subway, that Asian family that got beaten up? American, they're Asian American. They're New Yorkers, I believe, or Americans, Americans on vacation in New York. What? Possibly maybe visiting relatives or something. But that this was obviously a hate crime, and that why is it that there's, so I want to also make sure to bring up in this video the yoked Asian versus the woke Asian, because I remember a time in my teen years when San Francisco, in the western part of San Francisco, and in a number of parts of San Francisco, when we were teenage boys, we respected the Asians, because when I was a freshman, they were a terrifying army of chow yun fat looking guys who would pull out weapons immediately, the moment you looked at them funny. Everybody said knives, pipes, bats. You just never saw anything like it. You didn't know. You were like, holy shit. And your friend Johnny Chen from math class was not like this. He was just this normal kid. These guys were different. And they took no shit. They didn't take any of that shit. And I didn't know, because I was too young, where they got that from was dealing with blacks. That these hard Chinese guys in San Francisco they were at the fuck you, what are you fucking looking at stage of all the time. Fuck you, what are you looking at? That's what they would do. And it was because that's how the blacks did it. And they wouldn't punk out. They would, and their friends would show up. You wouldn't even know how they did that one. But they rolled as a posse. They were crewed up. 1992 or so came along, and suddenly everything changed. All of a sudden, they it was cool. Like, the streets were devoid of the Asian gangsters. But before then, they were terrifying. They were absolutely terrifying. Like, if you wanted to get cut up, you fiddle-faddled with the Asians. You messed with the Asians, and that's how you got cut. And yeah. So I just have a different, history with it. And then in my adult years, I got, into martial arts and stuff. And so I got to meet tough, old Chinese men who were way more dangerous than they appeared. You saw them suddenly wielding about half a dozen different Shaolin weapons and hitting the splits and all this stuff with their dad bod. And you were like, holy shit. Like, there's an entire group of people who live like this. And in San Francisco, people who understand San Francisco, it's like, yeah, you will live someplace in the sunset and you could see other people's backyards sometimes. And you might see somebody practicing kung fu in their backyard, just some old dude. And that, like, this dude is like, this is a kung fu man. and other groups of people didn't still do that. They didn't move like that. Like, I mean, it was impressive. Like, my friend lived above a bunch of people who did, Chinese, what they call Chinese acrobatics, but I mean, but they were incredible. Like, this whole family, was unbelievably skilled. So it's now I'm seeing the young Asian guys who are yoked to death, and so Asians are getting to, I'm not taking that shit from you people anymore, and we know exactly what people. There's only one group of people who are giving Asians shit. And they want to deny it. And even that family in New York were like, oh, well, maybe we had privileges that they didn't. And it's because there's a generation of Asians who've been raised to be totally, even more cowardly than liberal white women. You know, even more like morally lacking in any form of fortitude or principles as liberal white women. And it's just like, no, you have to stand up for yourself. And you want to know why? Because the blacks commit hate crimes against you, period. Because blacks are exceedingly racist. They're the only group that physically assaults other groups over the color line, and in any significant numbers. So a lot of Asian people just need to stop lying. This is the issue with wokies. Wokies are cowards who lie. They are not brave people who are trying to stand for principle. Every single thing, when you get to the essence of it, with wokies, is that they're fucking lying because they're afraid. They're afraid of confrontation, and then so they come up with some woke stance which allows them to be bitches, and that's it, and to avoid actually having a discussion, about like, well, boys aren't girls and girls aren't boys, that's period. And it's gender being something separate of sexuality is bullshit. You have to prove that. You have to prove that overwhelmingly. Now, you see, they don't want to go there because that would be confrontation, and they are inherently go along to get along people who are very, very cowardly. And it's because their ancestors had to get along with people who were very, very different from them. And this is really Catholics versus Protestants. So you get these people who actually are very much people who are agreeable. And that's okay. Like, that's perfectly fine. But when you are sitting there having an egregious hate crime committed against you, and then you kind of apologize because you're nobody. Okay, I like where somebody went with the New York subway hate crime. Somebody was like, if this were a bunch of white teenagers doing this to Asians, these kids would be like lynched. But because it's black girls, as usual, in a major city beating up Asians, everyone's like, oh, oh, oh my God, think of the children. It's like, no, blacks are racist as hell. Why are you all punks and cowards? Say it, you cowards. And so and that's why I support yoked Asian bro. Knock motherfuckers out. Shredded Jeff Chan. Knock them out. Bust their head. Bust their fucking head. They'll understand once you bust their fucking head. And that's it. People like that don't understand anything other than intimidation back. And that's what this is really about. The reason why all these cowardly white communists, people like Hassan, people like Vaush, they're all, oh yeah, I'm Antifa, and all this bullshit is because they can get away with it because no one will fight back. Because the people that they're around are cowards. There's some parts of the country that you're not seeing a bunch of people pop this shit because people will shoot them. And in Oregon, that's you defending yourself. Oh, I don't know. You defended yourself. I don't know. Maybe you're the bad person, and it's because of the intensely cowardly nature of so many of the white liberals who live here. Intensely cowardly. Like it's like if you're around it too much, it radiates and it ghoulifies you and makes you like it makes men put on dresses. And really, if you live around here, you'll see that all the time. You'll see it all the time. Big, ugly men in dresses. Like ugly. They're always ugly as fuck, too. It's so bad. It is so bad. This hurt as hell. Where you're like, dude, what is this supposed to be? Are you supposed to be funny? You know, like, are you supposed, and then that's the thing, another thing about the Northwest is where people will do themselves up in a way that you're like, I'm not sure if this is supposed to be funny or not, you know, and god damn it, another nut job. Okay, and so why then is there always this, like, go to, oh, the fascists and the white supremacists? And it's because, really, the left doesn't really know much else. Like, they literally just don't know much other than that. And also, they have to believe that they are some intrinsic threat to something, I guess, that would be the right, so that the right must, like, get rid of them, you know, or something like that. That, I think that's what comes across as kind of the fantasy in their mind about themselves, is that there's some, yeah, that they're so revolutionary, they're so smart that the only way the right could ever, the Christians could ever deal with them is by wiping them out, as is well known that the Christians are really good at. That's why there's still Native Americans, and there's more Native Americans than there ever were before. And there's a lot of claims about Native Americans, and the sort of like the landmass was teeming with these people, when there's no indication that by the time settlers got here, the colonials got here, that it was teeming with any such population. So much so, to the point that almost every ruin of the Mayan Empire was unknown to the local Mayans who were still speaking Mayan. I have dealt with a man who did the archaeology on Palenque. They didn't know it was there. They had no clue. They got asked, like, what is that thing there? And they're like, what are you talking about? That's a big dirt hill. And they're like, well, no, but that's, I believe those are ruins of a city. And they're like, and they were saying to the archaeologists, like, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean that there's a city there? You know, and so I really enjoyed that one. That was a great class, especially to see this guy, you know, when he's a young strapping fellow with the shovel in Palenque on top of the ruins, and you could see all the people who thought they were ancient aliens were kind of like, oh bro, I guess I'm stupid, you know. It was so good. Like, it's like, no, this is the real guy, this is the guy who did this. Like, we're reading the book he helped make happen about, like, we wouldn't know Palenque was there without him, you know. Like, we're really lucky to meet this man. It was like, that was the cool thing about San Francisco City College, Harvard on the Hill, as it once was called. So why, and so, because there we go. Why does the left go to fascism, that when somebody like me during the 1990s not only got to see the rise of hip-hop, so much so that I was in rooms with white people who were getting phone calls from Posdnuos. This was how normal, like, rapping and all this was. Like, yeah, like, there simply wasn't a ton of racism. We all hung out together. Everybody went to the Tribe Called Quest De La Soul show. There wasn't, the skinheads vanished by like 92. You never saw them anymore. It was, you know, maybe you saw them in a few places in like 94. You know, like, there would be still a tour of some old band, like Oxblood or something was still touring, and so you would see a bunch of skinheads around. By the time you get to the 90s, it's all two-toners and reggae skins, like traditionals. Like, there's no more of these crazy Screwdriver fans running around by like the mid-90s and early 90s. This is make-believe on the part of people who weren't there. And the kids of fundamentally their parents were dorks. Their parents weren't at the show. Their parents didn't know shit. And so they have to tell their kid everything's racist, because they just didn't know shit. And they never did anything interesting during that period of life. And that's okay. That's okay that wokies are like that. But this idea that they're finding some massive faction of people who are into Italian ideologies of the 1920s, it's like, I'm sorry, Bernard Shaw fans or Democrats? Like, who are you talking about when you're talking about fascists? It was like, so I'm just so done with it. It's so old. It's so worn out. And it's because these people won't deal with the fact that the Democrats repeatedly throughout periods of our history end fun. And then they stoke up all kinds of racial issues between groups. This time it's just some new way of approaching it, but it's always divisive. And so for me, my whole thing now about this is people need to understand most of this has to do with people that don't want to actually explain that they don't know much about fascism. They haven't studied it. They don't know that it was an ideology heavily influenced by Mussolini's Jewish lover, and and that fascism was so popular. It was widely ideas of it were widely adopted for a generation afterward in various countries, so as to establish order in nations that tended to have like independent military bodies and local groups that were historically known for having vicious fights against one another and things like that. But also it's that, like, say a group that got really into fascism was that there was an Israeli fascist party. At its essence, fascism is something that the Italians were basing off of what they were seeing the Young Turks, doing. With the Young Turks actually making it racial, where they actually started to wipe out people who weren't like them. And that's, of course, Armenia. And as Hitler said, nobody remembers Armenia. And just like now, nobody remembers Tibet. None of these communists seem to remember Tibet and or have any regrets about Tibet. So what this really is that commies, socialists, they have to do this thing where you have to fear fascism, really because they want collectivism, but fascism is the only socialist collective that logically started to do what made sense, and much more openly, while the communists are constantly disguising what they're actually trying to do. And it's just a way for the people who are in charge of the party to have a lot of stuff and to have a good time at everybody else's expense. The reference to then Nazis, there's this not even anything in America that could be compared to that. I mean, very seriously, when you really actually learn about this idea of ethnic collectives and stuff, the only thing that's actually in any way close to the Nazis are Black American collectives, and their concept that there's a thing called blackness, which that was key to a lot of Hitler's arguments and other ethno-collectivists of Germany, that there was something that was inherently Aryan or inherently Germanic going on, and so and so that's like that. What? And so that's oh my God, there's a cardboard. Wait, you guys got to see this. I got to show you guys this. There's a cardboard sign just stuck to this thing. Oh my gosh, it's been nailed into the post. Wait, let me show you. I guess it makes sense to advertise. I mean, you kind of have to respect the grind a little on that one, because that's high. You saw that wasn't low to the ground. That's high up there. Somebody really tried to nail that to the lamppost. But yeah, the reason why a lot of these people use the term white supremacy and fascism because they're really trying to disguise that they're grifters. When it comes to race, it's always grifting. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to get you to send them money to fight the good fight, and they're phonies, and they don't really know much about the philosophy they're saying that their opponents believe. They don't know much about their opponents. They actually can't name writers who are significant on the right. Like, if you were to ask people who are hard right, who are like way into it, who do they read? The left could not tell you. Now, it doesn't matter oh, hey, it's Kevin the squirrel. He hangs out outside of this place, I heard. If you were to ask, like, what the left is reading doesn't matter. Because to be a leftist, phony collectivist trying to get in other people's pockets, make other people pay for what you like, that's very normal. That's just very normal now. Being on the right and insisting on tried and true ways, tried and true customs, ways of life that are fundamentally beneficial and in concord with long-term positive and beneficial outcomes for especially the young in a family. That's all on the right. That's the right wing. The left wing just now and then kind of adopts something that works, so they're yielding. They're yielding to tradition. They're yielding to common sense. They're not being revolutionary. They're not raising their kids in some revolutionary way. If they feed them dinner every night, that's right wing. Sorry. But that's, I just wanted to make sure to touch on that because it's just so phony. And especially when you start dealing with the fact that the people in blue enclaves, when it comes to, their political views, these aren't smart people. These are people who think they sound smart. They don't do the reading. They're not into interesting ideas. And when they do every single argumentative trick that you always run into with everybody, and they are that culture. They're that culture of obfuscators and dippers and dodgers. And it's sad because really the worst part about it is it's going to make the young poor. It's making their young poor because they won't deal with reality. And these young people need a functional community that has another 100 years ahead of it. And right now, we're not seeing that in the Northwest. Only in the eastern sections of the Northwest can you imagine those parts of the country going on relatively stably or with stability for the next 100 years. While on the West, you can't imagine what might happen within the next year. All right, later.